Hello everyone, this is Huafang Li again. In this short video, I'm going to talk about the relationship between governments and nonprofit organizations. Now, this is part 2. Previously, we actually discussed the relationship between governments and nonprofits from complementary, supplementary, and adversarial relations. Right. Now, in part 2, different effects, crowding or crowd out by focusing on government's financial support to nonprofits and its impact on charitable giving from either individuals or the private sector. Now, the first article I want to discuss is Arthur Brooks' Public Subsidy and Charitable Giving, Crowding Out, Crowding In, or Both. So let's take a look at the main argument. So basically, Brooks summarized the relationship between public subsidy or the government money and private giving in a non-linear relationship, right? So at the beginning, if government increases the subsidy, it will increase private giving, which we call this crowding in effect. And past a certain threshold, and then increasing government subsidy will actually decrease or crowding out private giving. Now we name this crowding out effect. Right. So many empirical studies actually find this. Right. When a nonprofit organization is small, at the startup stage, if they receive government money, it will actually signals they can actually do things better. Then people are more likely to donate to them, right? So while they become larger, and the more government subsidy actually means, oh, you already got the government money, and since you are a large organization, my tiny donation possibly won't make any impact, so they will decrease individual giving. So that's the basic idea about crowding and crowd out. So can we have an example about crowding or crowd out? So let's say for crowding, what kind of things you can think about? Say for instance, in a township, they don't have a public library. Now the government decided to open a library, a public library, right? So which means government invested in the infrastructure, etc. Now then, to maintain the operation of the public library, right, you need many other resources. So one of the resources can come from nonprofit organizations. For instance, you can have friends for libraries, right? So for instance, so they can donate money, books to the library. So let the library be a better resource for the community, right? And the library can also be a hub for many community events, right? So so that's how when government increase public expenditure in libraries, it will also crowding in private giving, right? So the other example may be the parks, right? Either local state parks, and so this is very similar to the complementary relationship. Now for the crowding out effects, right, which means if government increases then investment or expenditure, then will decrease nonprofits' activity or drive out nonprofits in a certain area. So for instance, in pre-K education in the United States, you have government program. The government subsidized the program like Head Start, right? So if government decided to invest more in Head Start programs, either by contracting out to nonprofit organization or by doing other things, so that means with the government money, with the government subsidy, you actually don't need any other private contributions to support the program, because you only have to serve a certain number of pre-K kids, right? So in a certain period, the number of kids won't vary too much. If that's that's predictable. So we would say in that case, the pre-K education area, if government invests more, it will crowd out private contributions, right? So this is very likely supplementary relationship. Now, what's the empirical finding tells us? So then the recent literature review reviewed all the studies about the crowd-in, crowd-out hypothesis. Now, the general conclusion is it really depends on the context, right? So the contextual dependence of the validity of the crowding out hypothesis. That's what I would summarize the paper. So what do we mean by contents, right? So it means what kind of data source you use, right? So the sample, the country where the study being conducted, or the beneficiaries of government support, right? Either this government direct expenditure or measured by subsidies to specific nonprofit organizations, and also the statistical methods used here, right? Whether it's due to the regression specification or use of instrumental variables, etc. All these can change whether or not this is crowd in or crowd out. Now, the other thing is central or state and local government, different level of government also matters, right? Where your money from? Is this from the central government or is this from the state and local government? Because that may send different signals to individual donors, right? And also, the sector matters, right? And the private, whether the money is from individual or from corporation or from foundation or other private entities, they also matter, right? And the types of government support, is this a lump sum grant or a matching grant or contract, right? Or service purchase or voucher or award, etc., right? So different types of government financial support also matters. Right, so the tax resilience, numbers of other donors, different types of public goods, and number of initial non-donors, right? And the linearity of public goods cost function and the substitution between organizations, competition level, and the size of the market, right? All these things matters whether or not we are going to find crowding or crowd out effects, right? So, in general, studies that take subsidies to nonprofit organizations as a measure of government support are less likely to estimate crowding out effect than studies that use a measure of direct government expenditure. The reason for this is, of course, direct government expenditure is more broad, right? Covered more than just the subsidies to nonprofit organizations. Right, so subsidies to nonprofit organizations is more focused. So if you use that government subsidy to nonprofit organizations as a measure of government support, maybe it's less likely for you to find the crowding out effects, right? But the direct expenditure, as we already discussed, the many factors, right? Could be the service area, could be the number of donors, could be the size of the market, etc., right? So if you use a larger direct government expenditure to measure the government effect, you are more likely to estimate the crowding out effects, right? Now, the second one is about the different levels of government. As I already mentioned, central government support is associated with higher charitable donations, while measures that include multiple levels of government tend to find negative correlations. The reason for this, as I pointed out, different levels of government support nonprofit organizations. They send different signals. Right? The reputation is somehow different. It also should be noted here, it's country specified, right? The United States and in China, they may be, or in European countries, they may be different. But in general, central government sends a more reputable and more credible signal to individuals if they give financial support to nonprofit organizations, right? So that's why it could crowd in charitable donations rather than, if you receive money from multiple level of governments, especially you receive money from state and local governments, and it's may not always the case that it will send the signal that your nonprofit organization is doing a very good job, because people in local, they may understand the situation better, they may know the local information, right? So they understand the government subsidy to your nonprofit organization is because you are not actually performing quite well, or because of something else that may trigger them, discourage them donation in a sense. And finally, one of the things I want to talk about is about the methods. Right, so in experiments, a dollar increase in government support usually will crowd in about, on average, 0.64 decrease in private donations, which means government money are going to crowd out private donations. While if you are using non-experimental methods, right, collecting administrative or observational data, and you are actually going to find crowding in effect with a much smaller magnitude, right? So on average, if with non-experimental data, you are going to find an increase of $0.06 in private donation if government increase $1 supported to nonprofits. Now, the reason why is, I think, because two different methods, two large categories of methods, right? Non-experimental and experimental. They use based on somehow different logic. For experimental methods, it's the research, they usually have more control over experiments, so you can easier to identify the causal effects, whether or not then the direct relation between government support and private donation. While with non-experimental data, usually we would say it's a little bit noisier than experimental data, right? Because you need to rule out other factors that will also contribute to the either increase or decrease in private donations, the variation of private donations, right? So that could be the reason why using non-experimental data, you actually find a crowding effect, but in experiments in general, you are going to find a crowd out effect. All right, that will be all for this short video.